And it's the argument from morality. It says if there is one thing morally wrong out there, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard out there, it's just us, who's to say you're right and Hitler's wrong? There is no right. It's just your opinion. It's just in you. But we all intuitively understand there are certain things that are really objectively right and other things that are objectively wrong. But they have to be based in an object, not just in us, the subject. I mentioned my friend Bob Cornuke, who's the real Indiana Jones. And we've been on a number of trips together. And last year, Christmas, just before Christmas 2010, we went on a kind of a different kind of trip. We went across Europe and hit many of the World War II sites and many of the Reformation sites. We started in London, went into France, drove across France, went to Normandy, all that, then went into Germany. And along the way, on our way to Berlin, we stopped at several places Martin Luther was, where he went to seminary, and then where he tacked his 95 Theses on the door in the church in Wittenberg, Germany. On our way to Wittenberg, we stopped at the Buchenwald concentration camp in Wiedmar, Germany, not far from Erfurt, Germany, where Luther went to seminary. Now, in April of 1945, the Allies liberated the camp. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right, and they saw the crematorium, which is still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtroom attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Now, if there is no God, that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion, that this was objectively morally wrong. Is this just a matter of opinion? If there's no God, who's to say that's wrong? The leader of the expedition, or the Allied forces, I should say, was so incensed, he went into the town of Wiedmar and he ordered every civilian into the town to see what was going on right under their noses. In fact, if you go there today, you will see on the crematorium a plaque which says that the ovens in the crematorium were installed by a German business in, I think, 1942. Now, these ovens, by the way, this was not a concentration camp, or this was not a death camp in the sense that they baked people alive there like they did in Auschwitz. This was a concentration camp where they brought people in and they basically experimented on them and starved them to death. Thousands of people died there. This is where Joseph Mengele did his experiments, where he experimented even on children, like they were lab rats. Well, if there is no God, who's to say he's really wrong? We all know that's wrong. Well, why? There's a standard beyond us. There must be. In fact, how do you know who's right and who's wrong? Is it Mother Teresa or Hitler? How could you discover who was right and who's wrong? Well, let me ask you the question this way. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? Is it map A or is it map B? What would you need to see in order to know? Yeah, you would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. If Scotland doesn't exist, those two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we have a reference point. We have a real Scotland that we can measure the maps against. It's an objective reference point. Well, that's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If the standard didn't exist, there'd be no objective way to judge between Mother Teresa and Hitler. It'd all be just a matter of opinion. What is the standard? God's unchanging eternal nature. That's one reason God doesn't change. If he could change, he wouldn't be the standard. You couldn't measure morality. He is the unchanging standard of morality. Now, Everybody knows right and wrong, but it's not just about knowing right and wrong. There has to be a standard, even if you don't know it. It's got to be out there. By the way, most of us know right from wrong not by our actions, but by our reactions. For example, I may not think stealing's wrong if I steal from you, but what do I say the second you steal from me? Hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. If anyone ever tells you they don't believe in real right and wrong, just kick them in the shins and take their iPod, okay? They're going to get over that misbelief very quickly. In fact, there was at Indiana University a number of years ago, there was a professor giving a course in ethics, and he told his class, he said, you could write a paper on anything you want to write on. It just has to be related to ethics. I just have a few requirements. Can't be more than 20 typewritten pages. It's got to be in my office by October 15th. It's got to be properly footnoted and referenced. Great. Had this atheist in the class who wrote this paper on the merits of moral relativism. He said, there is no such thing as right and wrong. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. There is no real justice. It's just all relative. He handed it in on time. It was properly footnoted and referenced. It was no more than 20 pages, and he handed it in a handsome blue folder. And the professor got the paper, took it back to his office. It said, there is no such thing as a real right and wrong. It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. He closed it up. He wrote on the cover, F, I don't like blue folders. Next class, he handed it back to the student. Student got his paper back. F, I don't like blue folders. After the class was over, he stormed up to the professor. He said, F, I don't like blue folders. That is not fair. That is not right. That is not just. Professor said, whoa, hold on. Wait. Let me make sure I get this paper right. I read a lot of papers. I want to make sure I got yours right. Wasn't your paper the one that said there is no such thing as fairness? There is no such thing as rightness? There is no such thing as justice? It's all a matter of opinion. You like chocolate. I like vanilla. The student said, yeah, that's my view. The professor said, I don't like blue. You get an F. Suddenly, the light bulb went off in the student's head. Why? Because he was judging the professor against an unchangeable standard of justice, something that he said didn't exist in his paper. You see, as soon as you treat somebody
So, that's a good point. Back in the 70s, y'all probably don't remember that, some of you, but there was this whole thing that said you can't legislate. Y'all don't remember that, do you? In the 70s, the big thing was you can't legislate morality. Yeah. Y'all remember that? Well, I guess I'm the only one who remembers that. People were saying that all the time. That came from, in fact, a relativist. People were starting to say, it's just true for me, true. It's all, truth is relative. That all started back 60s and 70s. And it grew and grew and grew. It became the norm, right? To the point where when the chapter 1, if you'll think about it, we're even arguing what truth is now. True? Right? But we learned it's true is either absolute or it's not. It can't be true and false at the same time, right? It's either true or not. We're still arguing over what is true, right? So now the argument is what's right and wrong. So we don't know what truth is. We don't know what right or wrong is. And this has been about a shift in the last 30 years. So you see where this is going. A lot of confusion out there. And the reason is, well, probably the main reason is that for years we believed there was a God, and we assumed God wrote the laws, and we followed those laws. In fact, most Western law is based on God's law. Pretty clear, right? Mm-hmm. Then one day we decided, well, maybe that's not the law. Maybe it's not a God. Pretty soon, when you lose your moral foundation, it's all relative. And I like what he said right here. Oh, change page. He said right here, Joseph Fletcher, the father of modern situational ethics, he wrote a book and they followed it, okay? And I like what he said. Now, I don't like what he said, but he makes a point in here that relativists hate the words always and never, right? And he actually says here, one should never say never. We should always use the word, always avoid using the word always. You see a problem with that? He said relatives are absolutely sure that there's no absolutes. Is there something wrong with that whole idea? It's just weird, isn't it? Doesn't make sense. But when you have no truth, and you take the idea there's no truth, and you take the idea there's no ethics out there, or you make your own, everything becomes slippery and slide. It'd be kind of like if we took all the numbers off the clocks and told everybody to be there at whatever time, 4 o'clock, but nobody knew when 4 was. We just took all the numbers off. It would throw everything into chaos, wouldn't it? Well, same thing we've done here. For the person who denies all values his right to deny them. A situational ethics person believes there's no absolutes, but they absolutely want you to respect that. Yeah. Isn't that weird? So what they're talking about here is it's been going on for quite a while. You're just inheriting a lot of stuff out there now. Okay? So let's go ahead.
Justly, they realize there really is justice out there.
So he's talking about injustice. So what? That you just say, that's wrong. Huh?
You have to know what's right.
Yeah? What happened? Yeah. So has everybody done something wrong to you, and you, hey, that's wrong. You felt injustice. Your favorite football team got the kids in San Antonio that hit that referee. They felt something went wrong, didn't they? Yeah. I don't know the facts. I just know that 2 young men plowed over a referee because they felt injustice, right? So here's a bigger question. Where does a sense of injustice even come from? Why would we even feel injustice at all? Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you got to have a sense of right and wrong before you can even feel injustice. If you don't have a sense of right and wrong, hey, I don't care, whatever. You wouldn't care, would you? So a sense of justice is baked into each one of us. And where does that come from? Well, if there's a sense of justice out there, it has to come from God. And doesn't God have a sense of justice? And He righteous? Yeah. So when we feel injustice, we are actually being in the image of God. The only question is, do we feel the right injustice, you know? I feel injustice sometimes when the road's getting narrow, and it's just me, and it's just going to be one lane, and the dummy behind me, instead of getting behind me, wants to get in front of me. I feel cheated. You know what I do? I speed up. That bozo's not getting ahead of me. If he did, that wouldn't be right, would it? Now, that's probably not a big one to fight over. But the idea that you even feel injustice actually is a sense that there's something in here, right? And so I find it interesting, relatives, let's say they're relativists, I can't even say that. They say it doesn't matter. And some of them say it does, but it's just my injustice, right? Whatever I think is right or wrong. That's scary. And by the way, when society gets to the point where it says that it's creating its own laws instead of a objective law, it always goes into chaos. It'll usually go into tyranny. And by the way, that's what happened in Germany. People decided, we're going to create a super race. Irregardless of what God says, we're going to make a super race. And when they decided that, guess what they decided what became right? Well, if you're going to be the super race, you've got to get rid of the less races, right? Ooh, that's scary. So when people start going beyond objective law and creating their own law, that's the first step to tyranny. And when that happens, generally, you're going to see something you see in our society today. The loudest voices get all the attention, and they move the needle. So if you don't have an objective law, and your society's not firmly entrenched in it, the louder voices will start moving that needle over this direction. And suddenly, it's not the objective law that wins, it's people with the loudest voices start getting their way. It's kind of like a 3rd grade classroom. You have no teacher, who's going to win? It's the biggest kid in the class, right? Now, let's go ahead and look at that. Yeah.
It's out there. We know it. In fact, if there is no objective morality, then the Nazis were not wrong. I was at Michigan State a couple of years ago, and during the Q&A, there were a couple of atheists sitting right over here. And I got talking to them. I said, well, you guys are atheists. What's your standard of morality? And one of the atheists said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. And I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany and the majority decided to murder Jews, that murdering Jews would be morally right? And he stopped, he paused, he blushed, and he went, yes. And his atheist buddy sitting right next to him looked at him and yelled, no! The first guy knew that the right answer was no. But in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. And then you could ask him, well, why the majority? Why not the minority? Why not just one guy? Who said? See, that's the big problem with atheism when it comes to morality. Who said? The majority? Who said the majority? That's all relative. In fact, if there is no objective morality, love is no better than rape. Freedom is no better than slavery. Tolerance is no better than intolerance. What's the difference? You say one hurts and the other doesn't. Who cares about hurting if there's no standard of morality? It's all a matter of opinion anyway. Religious crusades are not wrong. I can't tell you how many times I hear atheists saying, you religious people, you were so evil during the crusades. Yeah, well, if there's no God, there's nothing wrong with doing crusades either, because there's no standard of rightness, so I can do whatever I want. See, the arguments they have against God, they've got to borrow from God in order to use against him. In other words, you can't complain about the problem of evil unless God exists. C.S. Lewis was an atheist, as you know, originally, and then he became a Christian. And one of the reasons he became a Christian was because he realized his argument against God was wrong, because he thought there was too much injustice in the world. And then he realized something about his argument. There was a big flaw in his argument. Here's what he wrote in Mere Christianity. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If you've got no reference point, you can't call anything just or unjust. And yet Lewis knew there was injustice. If he knew there was injustice, he knew there must have been justice. In other words, the shadows prove the sunshine. Evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Why? Because in order to have
So that's good. If you think about Genesis, it was good, wasn't it? Yeah. The evil came out when the serpent came and convinced Adam and Eve to choose. God gave it. The reason there's evil in the world, you can go back to Satan, but you can also go back to the fact that God in his love gave us the ability to choose. Right? So the reason there's a crooked line out here, people go out here and say the world's evil, and that's a proof there's not God. No, that is actually proof there is God. And I like that. I never really thought about that crooked line. So to say the world's evil must mean there must be good out there somewhere, right? So I like that. This is a great deal. The shadows prove that there's sunshine. Yeah. And so that's what he's saying. A lot of people look at the world as it is and blame God. And I think sometimes they're really truthful, but really I think a lot of times they just don't want to acknowledge God. That's an excuse for some people. So this is good. Listen to that piece right there. That is nice.
Have evil. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. In other words, you can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. So evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil again, but it doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was a standard of good. And there'd be no such thing as a standard of good unless God exists. Now, this next point here is absolutely critical to get, because if you're ever talking to people about this, They are going to confuse categories. And as a good apologist, somebody who knows how to give evidence for your view, you want to be able to untangle the confusion that they have. Let me point out two things I am not saying, or we are not saying with this argument. We are not saying atheists can't be moral. They can. In fact, during my debates with Hitchens, I kept saying, hey, I'm not saying you're a bad guy, Christopher. I'm not saying that atheists don't know morality. They do. By the way, do you need the Bible to know right from wrong? No, you don't need the Bible to know right from wrong. In fact, our country was started on what? We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is from Romans chapter 2. Paul even teaches this. The Gentiles who don't have the law written on their hearts. They know right from wrong because God has written it on their hearts. In fact, if you had to know the Bible to know right from wrong, that God was unjust for judging the entire generation of Noah. They didn't have a Bible, but he said they were evil, and they knew they were evil. Now, the Bible will give you more detail, but you know basic right and wrong from the moral law written on your heart. So we're not saying they can't be moral. We're not saying they don't know morality. What we are saying is that atheists can't justify morality. They can theorize about how we know murder is wrong, but atheism provides no immaterial objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. Now, stick with me for just a minute on this. This is an important distinction. And if you can make this distinction to people, you can clear up a lot of confusion. This is the distinction that philosophers call epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how you know something. How do you know that murder's wrong? Well, that's one question, but there's another question, and that's ontology. Why is murder wrong? Why is there a law that says murder's wrong? Where does that come from? It's one thing to know it, it's another thing to explain what it is. Where does it come from? If there's no God, this law doesn't exist. Because you don't get moral laws from biological processes. Let me give you an illustration of this. The distinction between epistemology and ontology is the distinction that you can use when you're talking about the times tables. Like, I learned the times tables from my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Fisher. He taught them to me. That's how I came to know them. That's epistemology. But the times tables existed long before me or Mr. Fisher ever existed. That's ontology. Right? Before he ever drew his first breath, before I ever drew my first breath, 4 times 4 equaled 16. That's ontology. It existed. Same is true with morality. Maybe I learned morality through evolution, if it were true. Maybe I learned it through my society or my parents or my school teachers. But why is murder wrong? Not just because they said so. There's got to be a standard outside of us that establishes this moral law. And it seems that an immaterial objective standard of justice requires a theistic God. So when somebody like Christopher Hitchens, God rest his soul, said that God is not great, how religion poisons everything, when he writes the word poison, what does he mean in this context? Poison. That's a nice way of saying religion is evil. Well, how can religion be evil unless there's a standard of good against which you judge religion? And that would mean you'd need to have God. Do you see he's borrowing from God in order to argue against him? In effect, he has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. This is the problem with atheists. They borrow from theists in order to argue against God. They borrow morality. They borrow reason. Where are you getting reason from? If we're molecules in motion, if you're nothing but chemicals, and there's not a real you who are making decisions out there, you're not reasoning, you're just reacting. There's no such thing as reason. You see, atheism has to borrow from God in order to argue against him. In fact, let me also point out that religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. See, I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. I can't live up to this book. In fact, I told him in the second debate, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to this book. But I said, if I could live up to the book, I wouldn't need a savior. When you say religious people have done all these evil things, let me agree with you. But you're just proving our worldview. We have done all these evil things, but there's no such thing as evil unless there's good, and there's no such thing as good unless there's God. In fact, when people say I can't go to church anymore because all those hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. We're all hypocrites. That's why we need one another. The church, it's not a hospital, or it's not a country
I want to take you to a verse within context here. What he's saying is really good. Mark 10. And when you're speaking to an atheist, I think we need to agree with them on some points. Murder's wrong, right? A lot of times they think we're trying to tell them they have to be moral. We just have to agree with them on the moral points. But here's the important point. If an atheist says murder's wrong, your question is why? That's the deep question. They can't tell you that. And so Jesus, I want to show you a really interesting thing. Now this kind of has to do with this. In Mark 10. Remember the story of the rich young ruler? The rich young ruler, he thought he had everything going his way, so he's coming up to Jesus and said, what else do I have to do to get eternal life? His first question is, as he was setting on a journey, a man ran up, knelt before him and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" So Jesus turned around and says, "Why do you call me good?" Okay, you see that? This guy had a sense of moral good. And Jesus is saying, "Why do you call me good?" Now, I'll have to ask Jesus exactly what he meant when he did it. I think he's actually saying, "Do you recognize me as God?" Yeah. But the point is, he saw goodness in Jesus, right? He saw good. He understood that good was there. Now, we don't know where it came from. I think that's wonderful. Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, God. Wow. There's your ethical argument right there, right? So, what he's saying is, when we're speaking to people about this, we shouldn't argue with people. Just say, okay, why is child abuse bad? Now they may tell you why it happens. They'll have all kinds of theories about why it happens. Poor upbringing and all these things. I get all that stuff. It says, so why is it just why? So why is it so bad? And just I'm just curious, what makes it bad? And it's a shared sense of disgust that people have. Everybody is disgusted about child abuse, right? Why? Well, it just makes sense, doesn't it? It seems like a dumb question, doesn't it? And the idea that that's a dumb question points to the fact that there is a moral lawgiver, right? And that's where you take them. Say, look, yeah, we all get that. I know it sounds like a dumb question, but tell me why is it so bad? Well, it's bad. Well, okay, why? And that's what he's saying. Take them back to that's our big word of the day, ontology and epistemology. We use that two big words. There you go.
Hospital for saints. I said that wrong, didn't I? The church is not a country club for saints. It's a hospital for sinners. We're all sinners. That's why we need one another. And by the way, if you ever read a book by Christopher Hitchens, or he's passed on now, as I mentioned, you can tell he's just angry at God, unfortunately. In fact, at one point, he said, "I will not live under this divine tyranny." Who's the tyrant? God. God's the tyrant. That's why I summed up both of the debates in my closing statement with him. I said, you can sum up Christopher Hitchens' book in one sentence. Here it is. There is no God, and I hate him. Said he's mad. All right, let's sum this up, and then we're going to take some questions and a break. We talked about these three arguments. I know we're going back to our previous time together, but these are the three arguments that we've laid out for the existence of God. And remember how we said that through these three arguments, we'll show there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator? Well, that's what we're trying to do here. Let's take a look at this. From the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space, so he must transcend those things. Secondly, he's also extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize everything we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. No space, no time, no matter. Bang. Here we are. From the design argument, we see that he's extremely intelligent. He certainly put this universe together with extreme precision, as we saw last time. He also has purpose. We're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we know he's absolutely morally perfect. And we also know he's personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. By the way, we also know he's personal from the cosmological argument. How so? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity does not decide, look, if he drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground. Gravity doesn't decide anything, right? It just does it over and over again. Well, to go from nothingness to a state of creation, a choice must have been made, and only persons make choices. So check this out now. We have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect, personal creator. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We've got the God of the Bible without opening the Bible. Now, does this mean that Christianity is true at this point? No. This is necessary for Christianity to be true, but not sufficient. We need more evidence. We don't even know about Jesus yet. We haven't gotten there. We just see that it appears there's a theistic God out there. In fact, if our reasoning is good, last time we were here, we pointed out these are the three major religious worldviews: theism, pantheism, and atheism. We've just given evidence for theism. God made all. If our evidence is good and our reasoning's good to this point, what does that do for pantheism and atheism? They can't be true. Law of non-contradiction. We've talked about this. So we say, okay, which of these theisms is true? Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? Well, before we do that, let's point out that none of these world religions can be true, if our reasoning is good to this point. Now, what I am not saying, hear me clearly here, I am not saying that everything taught by the world religions on the right is false. I'm not saying that every teaching that they teach is false. What I am saying is that when it comes to the existence and nature of God, the world religions on the right appear to have it wrong. Maybe they're right about other things, but when it comes to the existence and nature of God, they appear to have it wrong. Now, some people will ask, why is Mormonism up there? Why is Mormonism up there? Because it's polytheistic. Doesn't mean every Mormon believes this, but their official doctrine is, as man is, God once was. That one day God was a man. And one day, if you're a good Mormon, you're going to become a god of your own planet. And your wife is going to be eternally pregnant. I'm not making this up. But this is Mormon doctrine. Doesn't mean every Mormon believes this, but that's what they believe. They're polytheists, okay? Now, which one of these world religions is true? Is it Judaism? Is it...
So, Mormonism teaches as God was, man what God was, man will be. So they teach each one of us through the law of progression. So progression of good works, going to the temple, they have a whole theory. So there's 3 levels of progression, I believe. The last level of progression, even when you've arrived, you get your own planet. Your wife comes, if she's come to the temple with you and served and been faithful to you, she gets to be Ms. God and your God, right? That's what they believe. So they'll say they're Christian, but their view of God is not our view of God. And that's huge. So that was a big point. I'm glad he brought that out. Yeah.
Christianity or is it Islam? Actually, maybe none of them are true. Maybe they just have theism right, but nothing else. That's possible. But if God does exist and wants to tell us which one of these is true, what could he do? He could do something only he could do, and that would be a miracle. And that's going to be question 3, and we're going to get to that after the break. And if Derwin's here, he'll do a miracle, as I mentioned. After the break, do the third argument for the existence of God, if I can indulge you with this. And that will require us.
So, short lesson tonight. The moral argument. It's a strong argument. It's a logical argument. It's just as strong as the others. And the reason I think the moral argument is stronger than the others, to me, is that we all carry it in here. Mm-hmm. You may not know what DNA is. You may not know the 4 parts of DNA. But what you know is when you see something on TV that's horrible, it just shakes you to the core, right? You have a reaction. That's pretty much the one way we know that things are wrong is a reaction that we have to it. And it could be a very violent reaction type of thing, or it could be a mild one, right? So we've all seen something. We've actually maybe done something wrong and felt guilty, right? That's because we have in here a moral law that we were born with that God gave us. And he not only gave it, he gave it to everybody. So when he came to the Jews, he gave it to them in a written law, and he made a people to himself. When he gave it to the Christians, he took that written law and put it right in here for the Christians. Same law. That hadn't changed, has it? In fact, if you look at the Ten Commandments, the ones that deal with how we treat each other, every society across the world pretty much recognizes that you honor your mother and father. In fact, that one is the most common one from every society, is honoring of parents, elders. Murder. Yeah. All of them. Stealing. All of them have those built into there, and it came from here. It's part of our spiritual DNA. And so the problem is everybody kind of recognizes that, but they don't know where it came from. And there you go. That's our job, is explaining where that came from and how it does that, right? Y'all have questions? A lot of stuff, huh? Yeah.
That people use a lot of this in the Word of God is doing to others as you would want them to do to you.
Yeah.
Everywhere, even businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's justice. Doing to others as they have you doing to you. Yeah. Have others doing to others that you have them doing to you. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, he mentions that with the relativists in the book. He says they all want to be treated fairly. Yeah. Yeah. They want to treat you, treat them with openness, right?
You know, when I think about having the opportunity to go where I've gone, and even families, they're almost the same. You know, like people coming over here, all want to come to America. They want things for their family, they want essential needs and stuff like that. We do the same thing if we were in this situation, But I also thank God for those opportunities, because He'll give you the words. I've only had one atheist that I got to follow up with, and it was at McDonald's. I've seen him about 3 times. But I don't know, God just gives you the words. And to me, I'm like, okay, love God, love people. Love that person and pray for that person. And,
yeah.
That's to me. When they were talking earlier, I remember the movie Into the Spirit, when they talked about, and even on the website, we have on the card, they talked a little bit about that movie, that they knew, they had some moral, they knew what they were doing.
You talking about the Quechua Indians who killed the 4 missionaries? 4 it was, yeah.
And then the wise went back.
Yeah, the wise went back. Their society actually was based on tribal warfare, killing each other, and it was just endless killing until the missionaries went there and gave their lives. And then the wise went back in there and explained to them why they came and gave their lives, and they were so profoundly moved by the fact that these people came in love. They never heard of such a thing. They wanted to know more, and that it transformed their society. Yeah, and in fact, it's a great story. Is it the tip of the spear, or it's end of the spear? Yeah, great movie. Yeah, but they, even though lived in the furthest, in a very small area of South America, very unreached, right? They knew, and what they did know. When they saw love, they responded to it. Yeah, great deal. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Just to clarify, epistemology is what something is,
Yeah.
and ontology is why.
Yeah. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, how you learn stuff, what you know, and ontology is why. It's how we got there, how we learned it. It can be how, but it's the why behind it. It's what it is, and I call it the why. Right. Yeah, in fact, a lot of people say that they use evil as the argument there's no God, right? If God's so powerful, God, why does He permit evil, right? Well, He permits it because He gave us choice, actually. And He will wrap it up someday, too. There's an end point to the evil. But the fascinating thing is God, in His love, gave us the ability to choose, knowing that we would choose wrong. Right? It wasn't a secret. He wasn't surprised when oh man, I didn't know she was going to eat that grape or whatever. So He knew that. And what God wanted was us to choose Him, right? So He gave us a way home to choose us to come home. And that's the greatest thing He's done. That's the one place God will not go. He will not violate the person's will. So far, I've never seen, He'll convince, He'll convict, but He won't make you choose Him. That's for us. Now, there is a day, the Bible says, where every knee will bow and every tongue confess. I think that what that means is there's going to be a time when God comes back, and it's going to be unmistakable. In that day, there will be no atheist, right? Be too late for some people. The people who are lost will finally say, uh-oh. You know, they're going to realize. But a lot of people know it down here. They're fighting God right now. They know inside. Think about before you were a Christian. You fought it, didn't you? Right? So I like this. This is a moral argument as also proof of it. So I like the point where he says, you know, you can show so much. You can give all these facts. You got all this DNA. You got this. You got that, right? You got all this stuff lined up. But God does, if He wants us to know specifically, because everything He's shown us up to this point, it can be known outside of the Bible. That's pretty fascinating. I like that. Like I wish I had that screen back in there. It said, bang, 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 bang. Wow, it looks like the Bible He wrote there, but really that was just Him speaking through us, right? The nature. He built this place. So all that says it right there. So if He wants us to know more, He's going to have to do a little extra step, isn't He? And that's what that we call miracles. And the biggest miracle of all is the birth of Christ. Christ coming, God in the flesh. God and man lives in the flesh. Then even better than that, He resurrected, right? Oh, and even better than that, He lives in us now, right? So a lot of miracles coming in the next few weeks, right? But this is the part where you have to believe, right? So you can lay out all the facts in the world, and somebody might not believe it because they don't want to. A lot of times it's because they don't want to. But God doesn't give us 100% of everything all the time. He does leave room for us to choose Him because He wants to leave enough room in there that we have to make a decision. Right? Any other questions? Sweet. Next week, we'll be in the miracle section. I didn't look at my book. Is that chapter 8? Yeah. Chapter 8. So we'll have a miracle service. No. We'll look at some miracles next week. And be sure and read the book. Study book is good. And we'll look at that. Okay. So who wants to close us in prayer? 1, 2, 3, 4. God gave you the ability to pray. Okay. Good, Art.
Father in heaven, we come before your holy presence, Lord God, and we just thank you for the study, Father God. I pray, Father God, that we meditate on that, Lord God, and we pray, Father, that you would continue through your Holy Spirit, continue to reveal truth to us, Father God. Father, we know that there are people out there that don't believe that you exist, Father God. That's why you send your children to go out all over the world, Father God. We just thank you for teaching